Anyway, so look, we're here again with Miss Lewis and Mr Durie, and we're down in Millfield's beehive, or apiary. And today what we're going to do is we're going to do a bee inspection, a full brood inspection on this hive that's closest to us. So we're going to take our time to go through the brood. So for those of you, again, the brood is what we call our baby bees, and we'll be looking, just doing a bit of a health check. Miss Durie and I have been in Miss Lewis looking at the bee land, and I don't know if you've been out in your yard this morning, but it's such a spectacular day. I'm sure the bees are visiting any flowers that are in bloom. We were making note that actually, what you can't see, but there's a gum tree over just behind the gas supply there that's in full bloom, and there's a definite hum. So a lot of these bees are probably shooting off on that close by meal and bringing it back in. So I'm going to hand the camera over to someone. Miss Lewis will take it, and we might get started. I'll chuck on my hood and we'll get going. So I wonder if somebody at home might be able to, Miss Lewis, write down one of the reasons that we actually use a bee smoker. What's the point of us lighting this up? Because it's something that I've done every time we've done a bee inspection, but we mentioned it in passing the first time. What's the purpose of us having smoke when we do a bee inspection? And if no one else answers it, I certainly hope Kobe up in that classroom, you're typing away, because it's something that you know the answer to. So what's the purpose of the smoke? What does it do to our bees?
I'm just waiting for a comment to come through.
Yeah, there's that delay too, so I'm sure everyone's typing furiously at home right now. And while you're answering that question, if you had a question or you wanted to see something in particular before we started our bee inspection, be sure to write it or leave us a comment, because when we go and we start looking through our bees today, might be the last chance that you get to participate in this from home. So if you had something you wanted us to find, by all means, shout it out. Did anyone answer my question about the smoke, Miss Lewis?
No, not yet.
Does anyone? Do either of you guys want to answer it? What is it?
To calm them down? It
does calm them down. Now, there's two theories around why, and they're theories because we can't actually just ask the bees.
Lacey said the bees think there's a bushfire.
Yeah, that's right.
Lacey.
Yeah, you're right. So that's one of those theories around, we can't actually ask the queen bee for why it calms them down, but we think that perhaps the smoke is something similar to what would happen if there was a bushfire around. So bushfire is not good news for a hive, because typically hives are found in trees themselves. So when there's a bushfire around, the bees like to load themselves up with honey and make tracks. They might elope and find a new home. So we definitely know that when we try and light a smoker properly, when we light a smoker, the bees like to eat the honey up, so that keeps them calm. The other theory is that because bees communicate by pheromones, which is scents, and you're chucking in a very strong scent of smoke, that it disguises those pheromones. So one of the pheromones that they will inevitably be trying to communicate today when we're, poking through their brood nest, is that attack pheromone, which we want to disguise because we don't want to be attacked by the bees. And we can do that by using our smoker. So, Miss Lewis, was there any other comments that people made that they wanted us to look out in particular for? I know
No, we've had a couple of comments about the bees and the smoke.
Okay, good. That's good. It means that people have been...
They're all on the right track.
All right. Righto, so I'm going to chuck some gloves on, and you'll notice they're new, because somebody left a nice comment last time about my gloves being a little bit old and tattered, and they certainly were. So it was time for an upgrade, and I did that in the holidays. So, all right. So we're just going to move to either of you two, because there's that delay. I'm going to quiz you guys now. Do either of you two remember which box, top or bottom, we should be expecting to find the queen and the baby bees, the brood? The bottom. Miss Durie's right. So this is our brood box. So this is where we're going to be looking today for our baby bees and our queen. And this is our honey super. So between them is a gate, a special gate that's called a queen excluder. It stops the queen from going up top. So this area is effectively just honey stores, as opposed to where the bees will raise baby brood or baby bees, and keeps her down in the bottom box, which is more than enough room for her to lay eggs. I'm sorry about this, guys. I've picked up a whole heap of bark, but it's quite wet. I'm guessing from that rain yesterday it's made it a little bit more challenging to light. So I might grab another bit of paper, I think.
You can grab that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Miss Durie, that'd be great. So the bark and the materials that we're using for our smoke here, I've just picked up off the ground, but because it was so, I guess we got that drizzly rain yesterday afternoon, it's meant that it's all quite damp. So it lights well, but it doesn't stay lit. I think Miss Durie is solving my problem. Add a little bit more fuel to it. No, that'll do. Right, and I'll just chuck a few leaves on it. They are wet too. I mean, that Mr Durie was forward planning. You might have taken something from home that was a little bit dry. Now we're cooking with gas.
Right.
Rightio. The reason we have to keep puffing the smoker is because without oxygen, it doesn't complete our fire triangle, and fires inevitably will go out. So if you starve a fire of oxygen, it'll go out. And for us, pumping it takes the oxygen from outside and pushes it into the canister or the chamber through a hole here. So we'll give it another puff, and then we'll start to remove our honey super. A couple of puffs in front, let the bees know that we're coming. And I might hand this to Miss Durie, who's going to just keep puffing it on the odd occasion until we know that we're well lit. Sheridan, I'm sure will enjoy that job. So again, if we're going to move off the honey super, a good indication of whether or not the bees are doing well is how heavy their stores are in that honey super. Let's grab that, sorry. And that is quite heavy. It's a good sign. Just going to put a little bit of smoke up top, not much. Here you go, Miss Durie. I'm just going to move our honey super out of the way. Crack that seal. This bee doesn't look very happy with this bit. Understandable. So we'll just give them a nice puff up top. You can come a little closer, but come around this side here. That way you're not in the way. So the bees that are coming back here won't have noticed the top of the hive is removed. So they'll just land thinking everything's all right. And they'll only obviously be affected if they were going to go up top. So we're going to remove this special gate, which is our queen excluder, as gently as we can, so that the bees on it aren't shaken off and upset by our movements. But I have to double check that our queen hasn't made her way up top, which it doesn't look like she has. You won't be able to see this on camera, but there's a bee that's full of nectar. Can you see how much longer she is and how her belly, or like her abdomen, is so bloated and golden? It means that she is definitely trying to find the spot to put that nectar up in that honey super. So look, we'll pull some frames here. It's an 8-frame brood box, which means that the queen has 8 full frames to lay her eggs in. Typically we'll find on these outside frames that they're covered in nectar, and then pollen and brood, so baby bees will be all through the center. So what we're going to do is just crack some of these frames so that they're nice and loose. When we pull it out, they're not all stuck together. You might have noticed when we started talking that the 2 little nuke boxes that were there last time are no longer here. We decided at the end of last term that I'd take them home and put them in my backyard, because one of them was raising up a queen, and I wanted to make sure that we kept a close eye on how she's going. I have good news. The queen is doing well. Hopefully this weekend when I do another inspection, I'll be able to confirm that she's been out on her mating flights, which is the reason she ended up going home. So this frame here is quite an empty frame. There's lots of nectar. Quite calm. So up around that top section, can you see all the caps? That's all covering honey. Down around this, where it's glistening, that's all fresh nectar that hasn't been capped off yet. The bees put a lid on the honey when it's of a certain water content. And if the cap isn't on top of it, it is also like easier for them to eat and use. So it's kind of like a jar on a lid. The jar only goes on top when you know, it's full. Sheridan, you want to do me a favour? Yep. Over there is that metal frame holder. Yep, pass that one to me. I'm just going to push this down here. But for my this frame that I'm going to take out to make a space, I've got somewhere to sit it without it going on the ground. The bees will just hang out there. And I had a close look to make sure that there wasn't a queen on it. It's good. So a bit more smoke. When you're doing a bee inspection, the bees will naturally want to avoid the light unless they're a guard bee, in which case they'll be naturally inquisitive and kind of figuring out why their roof has been removed. So, you know, a nice calm approach, nice and slow, makes it a lot more friendly on there. This one's quite a heavy frame, which would mean that we've got a lot of honey again. A lot of honey, which is good. Those outside frames, can you see that bee halfway in the middle there with the white legs and the pollen? Did you see it, Sheridan?
No, I didn't.
Oh, it's a bit hard for me to hold. Can you see it? Maybe off to the side there. So there's a bee there that's got absolutely loaded pollen stores, and she'll be looking for a spot to kick them off. They actually kick them off into these cells. There's another one down the bottom there with white pollen on its legs.
So those big holes at the top, why are they so big?
So they're just like their pathways. They're
Right.
like roads for them to go between the frames. There's some bees that are hatching out on this frame. There's not a lot of eggs, but there's a lot of pollen and there's a lot of nectar, which means that they've got plenty of food. There's a couple of drones, which I'm surprised at this time of year. Typically the drones will start to be kicked out of the nest around now. It's looking good, nice and healthy. I'm going to sit this one, I don't see a queen, and it'll free up just that little bit more space for me so that I'm not bumping them as I go along. Another puff of smoke. See all the bees that have just come back up on top again? So we might take one or two more out, and the queen's likely to be on one of these two next frames. So if we're nice and quiet, we're really observant, we might be able to find our queen. This hive has an absolutely stunning queen. She's got really great temperament, really good traits, not aggressive at all, stores a lot of honey.
All the pollen? There.
Oh yeah.
What have you found there, Miss Durie?
Just a
I'm
bee
just
with
trying to
lots
get the
of pollen
camera to
on it.
focus. Oh, there we go.
You found a bee with pollen on their legs?
Yep.
Pretty cool, isn't it? They're such a bright colour, they stick out amongst the thousands of bees that are there. I don't see a queen on that side. I don't see a queen on that side, not yet anyway. Very calm though, aren't they? It's a beautiful day for this, in fact. So you don't want to do bee inspections when it's too cold, because it takes a lot of effort and energy for the bees to keep their temperature regulated. So on days like today, where they're not windy, it's nice and warm. They're generally really nice, perfect days. I'll just blow in the middle here, just to see if there's grub. That's great. So there's all different stages of brood there. You will not get that to focus. There's such dark cells on this hive. And they get darker the older the frame is. So it's to do with their bee footprint. So as the bees move around the hive, the wax that they make goes from like a pristine white to a dark black the older they get. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means that you know which of the hives that are, you know, fresh and those that are a little bit older. Just have a look on this one, see if we can find it.
Cooper and Macy Wing say hi and they would like some honey, please.
Okay, I think we've got 1 jar of honey back in the office. We did get some honey out before the holidays, but a lot of it is gone. We will reserve that one for you guys, and judging by how well these are doing, it won't be that far after that we'll be able to get more honey out. So no worries. Tell Cooper and Mace that jar is theirs, and we will keep an eye out for when we can get some honey. We might save it for when we've got you guys back and you can give us a hand to get it out. Again, a chocker's frame of brood. There's no queen cells. There's different stages of baby bees. There's drones on there. All great signs of a healthy hive. There's some orange pollen I can see in the middle there. No queen. We'll just pull one more frame and see if we can find the queen. Just one more. Any questions while we're doing our bee inspection today?
One of my old students, Giselle, has said that she has a beehive at home as well.
Oh, there you go. Well, I'm glad to hear that there are people out there also doing this type of stuff, because as you guys know, bees play such an important role in our environment. The more beekeepers we have out there, the better. And it's one of those things that, you know, you get just as much as you give. The more you learn about them, the more you're in sync with the environment, and the better it is for the environment. So,
Max would like to know how many queens are in the hive.
Good question, Max. So, Max, if a hive is well and everything is going great, there should only ever be 1 queen in the hive. There are exceptions to that, and that generally comes when the hive is about to swarm. So you might get 2 queens in a hive for a small amount of time, but typically speaking, that is a numero uno role. There's only 1, and all of these bees that you see here, all of them are her daughters and sons. So she is the only person in that hive that has the job of laying eggs. And when she lays those eggs, the other bees essentially raise them. So you think of a mother as a person who raises the babies, but in a beehive, the queen mother, if I use that word, her job is finished the moment she lays the egg. So the nurse bees or the worker bees, her other daughters, essentially take over that role of nurturing. But really all the nurturing is feeding them until they're old enough to work themselves. Have a look down here. Can you get the camera? Do you see how those bees are joined together like this? Oh, they're just snapped. Yeah, it's kind of like a spider web.
Yep.
So they'll naturally do the, there's a word for it, I can't remember what it is. Okay, just come back out and I'll put these bee frames back in. They naturally do that when they're forming wax. They kind of form these big spider webs. And they'll all kind of pass on little bits of wax and then form it, chew it up, and create the honeycomb that makes the structures that they can put in the hive. It looks pretty cool. They look like they're getting stretched out, but it's kind of a way that they just hang out, kind of suspended in the midair. Any other questions? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this up. So a lot of our bees on this one have actually moved on to the other frame. So there's a lot of empty cells there. Some of them, in fact, if you want to zoom in just here, this is a baby bee that's just hatching out. Can you see the... So it's chewing its way out of its cell cap. It might be hard to focus on.
I don't know if it'll focus. Yeah. Oh yeah, there you go.
You can see it poking its head through. So typically the bees won't help them. They'll have to chew their way out. But if it's a queen, they get a little bit more help. So the worker bees, if they're desperate to meet their new queen, might give them a little bit of a helping hand.
Josie would like to know how much pollen there is in there.
That's a good question, Josie. To be honest, it's hard to measure any one time. They go through a fair bit of pollen each day, so it's kind of like a menu that they they're cooking a meal every so often. So there'd be kilos of pollen, and I'm going really slow now because the bees are, I'm moving them around, but I'm not squishing any. I'm trying really hard. So yeah, a couple of kilos of pollen, but they go through a couple of kilos a day too in a full-blown hive. So depends on the season. So if there's a lot of pollen up for grabs, they'll collect as much as they can when the going is good, and they'll store it. And then when there's not as much pollen around, they'll have them as stores. So good question. Hard for me to actually answer that one. So with honey, it's a lot easier because the honey sits in just one box, whereas the pollen is spread throughout this down here. I'm just going to puff these off the edge here. I'm going to put my queen excluder on, and then I'll bring the honey super over.
The baby bee is Josie's favourite, and I think it's Max would like to know how long a bee will stay in its egg.
That's a good question. So when we're talking about, I know some of you, we had some comments last time around some learning units that were going on from other schools, I think, and they were looking at the different stages of a bee. So a queen lays an egg will stay in the cell for 3 days before it hatches out. It becomes a larvae, so it looks like a little grub, and the grub will swim around in its cell, eating lots and lots of food and growing. It's like every 3 days it almost doubles in size. So yeah, for an egg, 3 days. So the queen gets around, lays all the eggs that she can, up to, like I said, 1,500 a day, the right time of the year. So that bee hatching there will happen up to 1,000 times a day in a healthy hive. So you guys should feel special because it's special to watch a baby bee hatch, but it's a little bit different than humans. The reproductive cycle is quick, so it's very heavy. So this is a good sign. So this is like we said, just our honey. Because it's so heavy, very hard for me to maneuver it. What we might do, we've looked in this top box before, and this was the one filled with comb. And you can see this comb is a lot whiter than the comb downstairs because there's not as much foot traffic up here. So no honey stored up here, just honeycomb. So that's in the attic space, and it's ready for the bees to store nectar should there be a big flow on. So at the moment there's that gum tree that's happening. So it'll be interesting to watch as the time goes on whether or not more gum trees also go into bloom, and if that's the case, then we should be in for a lot of yummy honey that'll come. Are there any other questions? All I'm doing now is I'm going to have a quick look down these frames just to see how full they are, but because it's the honey super, the bees up here, there should be less. So, and this is like their storage cupboard. Any other questions, Miss Lewis or Miss Durie, that they're asking? Or
Nothing's popped up yet.
I have a question.
yes.
Because you said some of the parents are interested in getting beehives, how difficult is it to set up a beehive in your own backyard?
So that's a great question, and something that seems a lot more difficult than it actually is. It's quite easy to buy a beehive. It's quite easy to buy bees. The challenge comes when you're trying to look after them. They really look after themselves, but as any good beekeeper will tell you, you need to be in sync with them. So knowing if they're short on nectar, knowing if they're short on pollen, that's something that is a responsibility that sits on the beekeeper. Can you see here we've got, so this is a full honey frame, or mostly full. So it's something that we can definitely get out. I would say for those that are out there that would like to start their own beehive, the first thing to do is to really start to understand the steps involved, and there's lots of really great resources out on the web for that. There's online courses, there's podcasts, there's websites and things. And for those of us that know, our school, you've got your first step there. Your kids are going home knowing a little bit more about, what's involved and how to do a bee inspection, the different stages and how important they are. But it's the type of thing that people can do, and it's certainly something that's approachable for anyone. Depending on how big your place is, obviously will dictate how many beehives you can have. But there's things like registration and, almost like a car registration. You've got to register your beehives. And to learn about those steps, if you were really contemplating it, then I would definitely be suggesting that you could reach out to us, or you could have a look online for, like I said, those resources that exist. The primary industries have got how-to guides, and the podcast we all had a bit of a laugh about is because Mr Durie, me, had some spare time over the summer holidays and made his own podcast. So it's definitely something to check out if you've got a spare little bit of time and want to learn. And it's called Honey, I'm Home. So it's a good one.
Max would like to know when the queen bee sleeps.
Hi, that's a really good question, Max. Now, the reason it's such a good question is because she doesn't really sleep. So she'll rest at different points in the day. But from her perspective, her job is never done unless the beehive tells her. So because she's groomed, she's fed, she's watered, she's also ushered around the hive, it'll be the workers who dictate, where she is at any given time. It's also kind of the workers that allow her to rest. So they'll have like little resting periods, but mainly in small amounts of time. So it's not like they do a night and day cycle for the queen. For foragers, that's different because obviously they can only find nectar and flowers in the daytime. So they will definitely rest more of a nighttime. But some of them actually have got different jobs as well. So they'll forage of a day and then have to flap their wings to take out the moisture content of the honey. So great question. The reason it's so great is because there's not an easy answer. So queen will rest, bees will rest, but there's not. It's not like all of a sudden at 6 o'clock every bee stops working. They don't clock out and then put their feet up, watch a bit of TV and go to bed. But it's much more individual. But they are definitely wind down of an evening, and they're all home of an evening. So that's where in the summer months, when there's a lot of bees, that's not a bee, by the way, that was a motorbike. There'll be a lot of them kind of hanging out the front because there's no room for them inside. So that's called beading. So if you've ever heard of a beehive beading, it literally looks like a whole bunch of those bees hanging off of each other like we just saw out the front because there's no room inside or because it's too hot inside, and it's a nice cool evening. Not at the moment because it's so cold of an evening, they're all really jamming up in there and trying to stay warm with each other.
Just got one last question from Giselle. How old can bees get?
So,
or how long can they live for?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it comes down to the different types of bees. So there's 3 different types of bees in any hive. There's the female bees, which we know as the worker bees, and they've got a bunch of different jobs, but we'll call them the worker bees. There's the boy bees, which we know as drones. They're called drones because that's I guess the name that we call boy bees. And then there's the queen bee. The worker bees and the drone bees don't live for that long of a time, really. In Australia, we don't, where we are in Millfield, we don't really have a cold season like they might in other parts of the world where there's lots of snow, and that affects the length that they live. But on average, a worker bee will live for 30 to 40 days from when they've hatched to when they run out of energy and they expire. But it depends on the season. If it's in winter, they will last a little longer because they're not foraging as much. Perhaps the warmth of the day is only for a few hours in the middle of the day as opposed to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the summer. And for the boy bees, it's about the same, 40 odd days or 30 to 40 days. And again, as we've said in one of the other streams, if a boy bee does what it's meant to do, which is find a mating partner, that's the end of their life the moment they do that. The queen though, and this is the one that lives the longest, can or has been known to live up to 5 years, so has a much longer run, but typically they live for 2 to 3 years, so not long. If you think of it as an average, there's 40,000 worker bees and drone bees and only one queen, so the average lifespan of a bee is very, very low, and that's why the queen has to lay so many eggs to keep that, I guess, to keep the population up so they can gather resources and stay warm and stay healthy inside their hive. Great question though, tricky one. I think if you wanted to live long, then you'd want to be a queen bee. A worker bee, you definitely get a little bit more variety in what you do, but you don't get as many days to enjoy it. So, all right, did you have anything else, Miss Durie or Miss Lewis, that you wanted to ask?
There's just one more on here.
Righto, one more.
Sorry.
Go for it.
How much does a flow hive cost?
That's a great question. So these are flow hives, as you guys know. They're version 1 flow hive. You can't buy that version anymore. The version 2 is not too dissimilar from what we've got here. The thing that they changed is basically the bottom of them. So instead of it being, you can see ours are on bricks, version 2 have the option of having a stand. It's like a menu of choices, like you're shopping for clothes online. You can have a particular type of wood, a particular size of hive with stand, so it varies. So anywhere between $800 all the way up to $1,300 is what you can spend. These ones, when we bought them using Glencore's money for a grant, were about $1,000 each, so kind of in between. But if you were interested in doing that, the first step is obviously to make sure you know the options. Flow hives aren't the only hives that are out there, and they're certainly not the cheapest hives that are out there. They're also not the most expensive, but a traditional beehive will only set you back around about $400. So it's, yeah, horses for courses. It depends what you want. If you want to be able to get honey out like we do, then this is really the best way to go. Okay? Mm-hmm. Look, we will see all of you on a different day each next week, and we're really pumped about that. And not too far down the line, I think we'll be seeing you more than a day a week. Hopefully we're all back and back sooner when the data and the medical reasons dictate. But stay safe. Enjoy that learning at home. We hope that you learnt something today. I couldn't be happier. That hive's doing really well. It's doing better than I was expecting, because it's always tricky coming into autumn to know what's going to be in bloom, but I think that little bit of rain we had a month ago has really helped us. So honey is not too far away. But in the meantime, see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.